They will clap for you until the echo gets louder than their own voice, until your presence makes them feel small, until the light that once warmed them starts to burn. That's when it happens. Not with a confrontation, not with a blade, but with a smile, a silence, a slow, calculated shift in their posture when you walk into the room. You think they envy you. You think they're inspired by you. But you are wrong. They don't envy you. They want to become you. And failing that, they want to remove you. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In a world where power is currency, rising doesn't elevate you, it isolates you. You think achievement earns you admiration. But in the court of human nature, achievement is an accusation. Your success says to them, you could have done more. Your ascension is their indictment. And people do not worship their judges. They dethrone them. This is not paranoia. It is pattern. You may have already felt it in the sudden quiet when you enter a room, in the way their compliments arrive a second too late, in how they listen more to find weakness than to understand. The change is never immediate. It's subtle. It's surgical. And by the time you recognize it, the room you thought was full of allies has already become a chessboard of predators. It begins with admiration, because in the beginning, they need you. Your light warms them. Your presence elevates their own status. You are the proof that greatness is possible and that, maybe, by standing close enough, some of it might rub off. But then, you go further. You rise faster than they anticipated. You don't just succeed, you begin to dominate. And now your existence threatens theirs. Not physically, not even explicitly, but emotionally, existentially. Because every step you take forward reveals how little they've moved. And humans, Machiavelli knew, do not respond to mirrors with gratitude. They respond with fire. The betrayal rarely comes from the stranger. The stranger has no reason to hate. Betrayal comes from the familiar, the friend, the mentor, the peer. Because these are the ones who watched you from the start. These are the ones who thought you were safe, controllable. But when you outgrow their script, when you refuse to stay the character they assigned you, they don't rewrite the story. They try to erase the actor. Machiavelli didn't warn us out of cynicism. He warned us out of clarity. Because the first rule of power is not to ascend. It's to survive ascension. You think power makes you free, but real power isolates. It strips you of comfort. It turns every relationship into a potential battlefield. The same voice that once praised you becomes the whisper that poisons the room. The same hands that applauded now build your trap. And the tragedy? You still love them. You still want to believe. You still confuse history with loyalty. But they don't live in the past. They live in the shadow of your present. And shadows despise the sun. There's a reason kings wore crowns, not to symbolize glory, but to paint a target. The higher you rise, the clearer the aim. And while you're focused on the next step, they're already discussing how to pull you down, without getting their hands dirty. Machiavelli's genius wasn't just political. It was surgical. He didn't teach fear, he taught perception. Because to see people as they are, not as you hope them to be, is the first liberation. And in seeing clearly, you begin to understand that no success goes unpunished. No light stands without a storm gathering at its feet. So ask yourself, who benefits from your presence? And who disappears when you no longer need their permission? Who celebrates your rise in public and sharpens their silence in private? They don't envy you. They prepare to replace you. We grow up believing that success is respected, that those who work harder, rise higher, think deeper, earn admiration. It's the myth we've been fed since childhood, that greatness is rewarded with loyalty, that people want you to win as long as you play fair. But Machiavelli knew otherwise. He knew the brutal truth: power does not inspire love, it invites betrayal. In The Prince, he wrote that it is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose. Not because fear is stronger, but because love is a lie, a performance, a fragile arrangement built on benefit and illusion. And when either fades, the love rots with it. You think your friends cheer for you, but what they're really cheering is proximity. As long as your rise doesn't threaten their reflection, they'll smile. But the moment your light casts a shadow on their stage, the applause dies. Because they were never clapping for you. They were clapping for what you made them feel about themselves. And when you no longer serve that feeling, when your greatness exposes their stagnation, they will resent you for existing. That's the part no one says out loud. Machiavelli didn't write for the good-hearted. He wrote for survivors, for those who understand that human nature, when unguarded, is selfish, envious, fearful. He didn't demonize these traits, he documented them. Because the game of power isn't about morality. It's about mechanics. The deeper truth? People do not hate you for your flaws. They hate you for your freedom. They hate that you move without asking, that you speak without stuttering, that you decide without permission, because your independence reminds them of the cage they've built around their own lives. You are a mirror, and people do not love the mirror that shows them their chains. So they will talk. They will doubt. They will question your worth, your intentions, your soul, not because it's true, but because they need it to be. If they can reduce you, they can excuse their own submission. If they can tear you down, they never have to rise. It's not personal. It's structural. It's embedded in the fabric of human interaction. Machiavelli saw it in the courts of Florence, men who toasted your health in the evening and plotted your exile by morning. And we see it now in conference rooms and comment sections, in friendships that fracture the moment your vision outgrows their comfort. Modern life hasn't transcended this truth. It's only disguised it. Today, betrayal doesn't wear armor. It wears a smile. It doesn't shout in opposition. It whispers in doubt. The new poison is subtle, sarcasm cloaked in humor, delayed replies, the just playing devil's advocate routine. Sabotage now comes dressed as concern. They'll say you've changed, because you have. You've stopped apologizing. You've started walking. And that terrifies them. Machiavelli would tell you, do not wait for the knife to be visible. The hand that holds it is already shaking yours. We've been told to be transparent, authentic, vulnerable, but Machiavelli knew that exposure is not connection, it's currency. The more they know, the more they can use. The moment you confess your dream, they begin to prepare their weapons. Because the clarity of your mission is an insult to their hesitation. And in a world of masks, the man who speaks without disguise becomes the enemy of all who still hide. So how do you survive? You learn what they forgot. That kindness, unguarded, is not a virtue, it's a resource. That openness, offered too soon, is not trust, it's ammunition. That being loved is not safety, it's exposure. You do not owe them your soul in exchange for applause. Because Machiavelli's real lesson wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He didn't tell you to destroy others. He told you to stop letting them destroy you in the name of virtue. He taught that control is not a sin, it's a shield. That manipulation is not evil, it's inevitable. That in a world where every smile may hide a dagger, power is not what you take. It's what you prevent. The world has changed, but people haven't. Envy still smiles before it strikes. Weakness still demands your silence. And the moment you stop playing small, the wolves will arrive in robes of friendship. So you must ask yourself, are they really clapping? Or are they counting the steps to your fall? Because in the theater of power, not everyone in the audience wants you to finish the play. You begin to notice the shift in how people look at you. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you stopped hiding that you're no longer like them. You speak less. You move differently. You start asking fewer questions, and instead, you start watching. And that's enough to trigger something in them. They can feel it. The old rhythm is gone. They don't know if you're rising or withdrawing, and that uncertainty alone makes them uncomfortable. This is the moment Machiavelli operated in. The gray zone. The in-between, where the game begins before anyone realizes they're in it. He never waited for people to show their teeth. He watched the shifts in tone. He read silence like scripture. Most people look for betrayal at the finish line. He saw it at the handshake. What you've now begun to understand is this. The real danger was never violence. It was exposure, visibility, being known too clearly by people who haven't earned access. Because knowledge of you is power over you. And the mistake most people make, the mistake you've probably made for years, is confusing openness for strength. You were taught that being transparent would build trust, that speaking your goals out loud would make them real, that showing your wounds made you brave. But Machiavelli's doctrine treats that entire idea as a trap, a form of self-sabotage disguised as virtue. His logic is cold because it's accurate. If they know what you care about, they know what to use against you. And if they know what you fear, they know where to aim. This is where the internal collapse usually happens. Not because the world betrayed you, but because you realize how deeply you've misread it. That every moment you believed connection was unconditional, someone else was weighing how much you were worth to them. That the person you trusted most didn't change, they simply ran out of reasons to pretend. The system, as Machiavelli describes it, doesn't reward honesty. It rewards control. Not dominance, not cruelty, but control over what others perceive. That's why he warned that rulers must learn not only how to act as both beast and man, but how to shift between them without leaving a trail. It's not about being feared by all. It's about never being fully known by anyone. And here's the critical adjustment. You don't need to become ruthless. You need to become unreadable. This is not about becoming paranoid or antisocial. It's about understanding how power flows through perception. Visibility is vulnerability. Predictability is weakness. When people know what moves you, they build your leash. When they don't, they hesitate. Machiavelli didn't say lie to everyone. He said, limit what they can predict. This is why he taught that alliances should be silent. Motives should be layered. Reactions should be delayed. Because in delay, you create doubt. And in doubt, you gain space. Not emotional space, strategic space. In modern terms, this means resisting the impulse to narrate your life. It means breaking the reflex to explain yourself every time someone challenges you. Most people's defense isn't physical. It's verbal. But Machiavelli understood that the moment you explain, you hand over your operating manual. Watch how this plays out today. The employee who overshares at work is sidelined. The man who reveals his need for validation is quietly deprioritized. The friend who expresses too much ambition becomes the target of silent resistance. Not because the world is evil, but because humans instinctively defend what they understand and attack what they don't control. Once you become aware of this dynamic, it's hard to unsee it. Conversations begin to look like negotiations. Compliments start sounding like positioning. Offers of help carry the scent of surveillance. It doesn't mean every person is an enemy, but it does mean every relationship operates on leverage, not sentiment. And Machiavelli's solution was brutal in its efficiency. Reduce your surface area. If they can't find where to press, they stop pressing. If they can't define your intention, they assume risk. And risk, to most people, is a deterrent stronger than ethics. So you start testing this in small ways. You speak last instead of first. You observe the reaction to silence. You withhold your emotional reactions, not because you're suppressing them, but because you're evaluating who deserves access to them. And the effect is immediate. People pause before pushing. They reword their requests. They become cautious. Not out of fear, out of uncertainty. That's control. And this isn't manipulation. It's adaptation. You are not rewriting morality. You're adjusting to how morality is actually practiced, not preached. Because in Machiavelli's framework, virtue without strategy is suicide. And power without subtlety is suicide by spotlight. So the real question becomes, how much of your suffering came from your need to be seen clearly? And how much more powerful would you be if they never quite knew what version of you they were speaking to? The man who internalizes Machiavelli's framework stops asking who to trust and starts asking what each person needs. That's the pivot, not toward isolation, but toward utility. Emotional loyalty is unpredictable. Need is stable. That's why Machiavelli emphasized function over affection. You don't measure people by what they say. You measure them by what they fear losing and who they believe can provide it. This is the blueprint of reconstruction. Not by building new alliances, but by shifting how you define control. Most people try to gain power through charisma or approval. Machiavelli would call that a liability. He taught influence not as a byproduct of virtue, but as a mechanism of leverage. Meaning, stop trying to be liked. Start becoming necessary. He applied this to rulers, but it holds in every social structure. In a job, become the person whose absence creates friction. In a group, become the one who holds access to a desired outcome. In a negotiation, frame your position not as desirable, but as inevitable. The point isn't to impress. It's to render your presence structurally embedded. Machiavelli observed that people don't stay loyal to persons. They stay loyal to systems. If you're just a person, you can be replaced. But if you become the system, the process, the access point, the function that others rely on, then replacing you becomes a disruption they can't afford. This isn't abstract. It's technical. Take the example of Cesare Borgia, a prince Machiavelli admired not for his ethics, but for his execution. When Borgia needed to pacify a rebellious province, he sent a cruel enforcer to impose order. When the people inevitably hated him, Borgia had the man executed in public. The message was clear: I bring stability, and I punish chaos even when it serves me. Machiavelli noted this not as evil, but as calculated leadership. The ability to create fear, then convert it into dependency. Ruthless? Yes. Effective? Undeniably. In modern settings, this principle doesn't require violence. It requires asymmetry. If people feel they can replace you easily, they will. If they believe losing you introduces volatility into their system, they adjust. That adjustment is power, not dominance, not intimidation, just structural necessity. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote, "A wise prince should establish himself on that which is in his own control and not in that of others." The real power play isn't controlling people. It's controlling the conditions under which people make their decisions. You don't argue with them. You build the road they end up choosing. And that means controlling your visibility, not hiding shaping perception. Machiavelli repeatedly warned against being too virtuous in public. Not because virtue is bad, but because it makes your moves predictable. He favored selective contradiction. Show generosity in one arena and ruthlessness in another. Be flexible with the weak, strict with the influential. Vary your methods so no one builds a formula around you. This tactic creates tension, but more importantly, it creates psychological terrain. When people cannot reduce you to a consistent pattern, they approach you with caution. And caution is the gatekeeper to respect. That's the turning point. You stop expecting people to behave better. You start controlling how they interpret you, not through force, through architecture. Think about modern leadership. The most successful leaders are not the ones who inspire universal love. They are the ones who maintain consistent leverage across competing interests. They keep people guessing without creating chaos. They make themselves the gravitational center. That's not charm. That's Machiavellian positioning. And the tool to sustain it isn't charisma. It's emotional detachment, not indifference strategy. The ability to observe someone's emotional reaction without rushing to explain yourself. Most people panic when they're misunderstood. Machiavelli wouldn't. He'd see misunderstanding as fog, and in fog, you have the advantage. So the reconstruction begins with subtraction. You strip away your need to be seen, affirmed, or understood. Then you replace it with frameworks. Who benefits from my failure? Who profits from my visibility? Who loses power when I succeed? Those are not paranoid questions. They're diagnostic tools. They tell you where the game is being played and who's holding the board. And when you understand that, your actions change. You stop narrating your moves. You stop offering emotional transparency as a peace treaty. You stop thinking silence means weakness and start using it as a signal, not a retreat, a calibration. Because Machiavelli didn't offer comfort. He offered clarity. And once you have it, you stop playing defense in a world that was never built to reward honesty. You start building a position where your silence means something, where your absence creates problems, where your presence solves them. And when you become that, not admired, not adored, but required, you stop surviving the game. You start shaping it. The irony is sharp. You were taught to earn respect by being honest, loyal, visible. But Machiavelli wrote that a prince who acts openly, who shows his thoughts and emotions clearly, only arms those who want to use him. He never said don't feel. He said don't display. He didn't call emotion weakness. He called it a tool. One you don't hand over for free. So what now? Now you operate with different rules. You realize that being liked is not the same as being safe. That being transparent is not the same as being strong. You've started to notice the shift in how people interact with you once they sense you're no longer predictable. The awkward pause before they respond. The way they measure their tone. They don't know what changed. They just feel the balance has tipped. That's not arrogance. That's control. You no longer reveal your moves before you make them. You stop correcting their false assumptions. You let them guess, because guessing burns their energy, not yours. You don't clarify your intentions, not because you enjoy confusion, but because every clarification is a surrender of leverage. Machiavelli never suggested a life of deception. He suggested a life of positioning. There's a difference. One requires constant lying. The other requires constant awareness. Not to manipulate, but to insulate. Because the real function of power isn't to dominate, it's to protect. Not just yourself, but the work, the ideas, the mission that will collapse under too much explanation and too little mystery. And now, the relationships around you change. Some people detach. You don't chase. Some become more cautious. You don't explain. The clarity hits slowly. You were never hated for what you lacked. You were resisted for what you revealed too early. Visibility breeds competition. Ambiguity breeds hesitation. The second is safer. This is not a call to be cold. But if you want to move freely, you cannot live in a room full of glass walls. Not because you have something to hide, but because others have something to gain by watching. So you rebuild your presence, piece by piece. Not louder, quieter. Not kinder, more selective. The version of you they now encounter isn't defensive. It's unreadable. And unreadable means harder to control. And harder to control means harder to remove. Machiavelli understood that no ruler is safe just because he's right. Safety doesn't come from being correct. It comes from being irreplaceable and unclear enough to be underestimated. So ask yourself this. In your current life, how many people know exactly how to reach you? To get a reaction? To provoke you? To win you back into compliance? Now ask the harder question. How many of them deserve that access? This script began with a warning that those who rise become targets. But it ends with an option, not to avoid the rise, but to understand what it costs. Because once you become aware of how the system works, you don't escape it. You decide how to be seen inside it. And that, more than any external shift, is what gives you distance from the ones still playing for approval. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. When was the moment you realized someone wasn't clapping for you? They were waiting for you to fall. Not out of hate, out of calculation. Share the moment. Don't name them. Describe the shift. We're not asking for closure. We're watching for patterns.